Hold on to your hats. Hold on to your hats, folks. Here we go. Hello, everyone. It's Brian Waters here from the YouTube, in hopes that you can hear me. And Brian and Stefan, can you just say hello so we can check your audio?
Yep. Hello, that's Brian.
Hi, yeah, it's Stefan.
Okay, I'll just wait for confirmation in the chat. Always takes a few seconds. Just say hello again.
Hello from me. Hello from Brian.
Hello from me.
It's the three Ronnies.
I was going to say
Two Ronnies, absolutely, yeah.
Two Ronnies, and it's a goodbye from me.
They're saying they can hear, but it's echoing. That's a bit strange. I rather doubt that. I think it's probably just the acoustics of my room. This room is very reverberant, actually, and I'll try to mute my microphone when I'm not speaking. Yeah. So I apologise for the big sound of Brian. But anyway, here we are. This is very exciting. I'm not going to waffle as much as I tend to. But we have a very exciting evening. I'm delighted to have Brian and Stefan, familiar friends now from Leeds Conservatoire, who are going to give us a 1 hour, notionally an hour's masterclass on the tropes and so on of the Bond films, the music, but other aspects as well. And we're inviting you. We've got a good number of viewers. That's fantastic. So welcome to everybody. You are, there are lots of great puns in the chat. Keep those coming. And we invite your questions as we go along. So if there are things that Brian or Stefan say that you would like to ask questions about, feel free to do so, and we'll try to address those either during the course of the presentation, or we'll have like a Q&A session towards the end. So just to remind everybody who might not be familiar, this is basically centered, I mean, it's useful anyway as a standalone thing, but the reason we're doing this at the moment is because we're running a film scoring competition with a James Bond style film, which is free in our library, and you can rescore that. It will go to judging, and the judges include Nicholas Dodd, who has worked on multiple James Bond films on the music, and the winner will have their score performed and recorded by Northern Film Orchestra. So that's a quick synopsis of why we're doing this now. But regardless of that, this should be a really fascinating insight into film, into music, the whole culture of James Bond and all that type of thing. So without any further waffle from me, I'll hand over to the chaps.
Great. Okay, well, evening everybody. Like Brian said before, if for any reason you can't hear me or hear Steph, if you can let Brian know straight away so we don't go waffling on for ages for no reason. So basically, I'll just share my screen for a minute. Let's just do that. So you should now be able to see that.
Yep.
Hopefully. And what that is, I've just got a PowerPoint to help with the structure. That's all. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, something like that, on the various textural and harmonic tropes that have basically followed James Bond around right from the 1960s, in fact before that, until even now. Okay, so although the James Bond composers change, the music, I mean, there is a sameness to the music which has got all these different tropes in them that we're going to discuss. Now, the thing is, you might think, well, you know, when would you ever want to or need to write James Bond music? But the thing is, the film music industry is basically, it's all about basically writing in the style of different things. You're going to come across directors who are going to say, I'd like this to be in the style of John Williams, I'd like this to be the style of XYZ, and you are definitely, I can guarantee, going to come across somebody at some point who talks about wanting you to write orchestrally or texturally or harmonically in the style of the James Bond thing. Okay, I've been asked to do it a couple of times in my career, and I've never done a James Bond film, but I've had to write in that style a few times. So, okay, so let's just crack on. I've put here the real James Bond was always the music, and again, after that, if you go one step further, the real James Bond initially, at least, was always John Barry. Most of you, I would imagine all of you will know who John Barry is. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but he was the mainstay of the Bond composers for a good long time. So we ask ourselves, why is the music from the James Bond films so recognizable? And it's one of those things when you're talking about music that you can always recognize the music and the style. But if someone says, well, what is it about that style that actually makes it what it is? Sometimes people get a bit tongue twisted. And what we need to do really with any kind of music is to understand the music. We need to categorize the different components. It's the only way you can understand music is to split it down into what it amounts to. It splits it down into its core components and discuss them individually. That's the only way you really learn anything to do with music. So we look at what these different areas, these different parts of the music are. Inevitably, we're talking about harmony, arrangement, texture, instrumentation, rhythm, and melody. Obviously, we're talking about production as well, but for now, we'll just deal with those things. So when I'm talking to you over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be referencing either the sound or the harmony. Okay? I mean, there aren't that many melodies really in film music. Again, it's something that people always generally misunderstand. If you're a film composer, about 85% of what you do will not involve melody writing, it'll involve underscore writing. So how do the James Bond films and how does the music create mood? Because that's the only reason they have the music there, is to essentially put you in that James Bond state of mind. And that's what we're going to do tonight, hopefully. Now, we're not doing it by saying, you know, I'll be playing a load of chords to you and a load of different types of chords. I'm not for 1 minute saying that you have to use these for this competition, okay? That's not what composition teaching is all about. You don't say, check these chords out, use these, what could go wrong? What you're doing is you're basically putting people in the James Bond zone and explaining what kind of chords work and what kind of atmosphere works. And then it's for you to basically take something away from that and go off and do your own thing, essentially. Give James Bond your own spin. So, although the James Bond sound seems quite dated nowadays, at the time when it was first invented, if you like, by John Barry, it was actually new. It was brand new, it was exciting, it was exuberant, and it was distinctly jazz influenced. So what started out as brand new and of the moment has over the last 60 years become dated, obviously, but it's a testament to how much it works, the fact that they still use this, despite the fact we've gone through David Arnold, a few other composers, and we've ended up with Hans Zimmer doing a cracking score for No Time to Die, but they are all still essentially reading from the James Bond music songbook, if you like, in terms of texture and orchestration and harmony. So texturally, that sound has stuck over the years, but there have been occasional additions. Different composers have tried to use different instruments, different sections. Harmonically, again, there's the certain number of tropes that work, but occasionally people would try small additions, and you can too. Rhythmically, I think it's the area where it's become the most modernized. When I watched No Time to Die and a few films before that, the rhythm element had definitely, was definitely more contemporary. So it's really the textures, the strings, the brass, all the rest of it that have really stayed the same. So if we go on to instrumentation, arrangement, and production, we look what we actually mean by that. Instrumentation, we're talking about strings, brass, rhythm section, less so about woodwind. Woodwind don't really play a huge part in Bond. It's all heavy brass, it's sultry strings, and it's all done essentially with that, like I said there on the bottom, the production. I've put that it's swimming in reverb. Obviously, I am exaggerating, but they use reverb quite a lot in these recordings, mainly because of the way they record the orchestra, which we don't have time to go into. The arrangement, it ranges from subtle and sultry, and that's the kind of stuff I'm going to be going through, right through to energetic and punchy using these jazz orchestra style brass sections. Now, when I say jazz orchestra, In a normal symphony orchestra, you would get 2 or 3 trumpets, you would get 2 trombones and a stack of French horns. In the orchestra that John Barry used to use, he used to use a jazz orchestra set up in the orchestra. So he'd have 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, and 5 saxophones alongside a symphony orchestra. Okay, which is why you've got that real jazz orientated kind of smoky jazz club mixed with a symphony orchestra, and I think that's what gives it the real original kind of feel to it. Now, if we get a bit busy with the actual technical side of it now, I've put here that you've got minimal vertical voicing. Now, at the risk of trying to confuse people, what I mean by that, when I'm talking about voicing chords, I'm talking about not going to the keyboard and just putting, let's say I go to the keyboard now and I put all 10 fingers. Now, you would never do that with a string section for a start. Okay, much less a James Bond string section. String sections are normally 4 or 5 part voicing. So when I put minimal vertical voicing, I'm talking about this. Basses, cellos, violas, violins at the top. Okay, and if I go to the next. It's that classic James Bond sound, and it's a combination of the chords I'm playing and the orchestration. You have it spaced out at the bottom, and what I mean by that is when you look at the bottom notes, you have plenty of space between the basses and the cellos. If I put all my fingers in the lower register, it's just lumpy and horrible. Nobody does that. So if you've got a keyboard great with even average samples on, and you've got 10 fingers, don't use them all. Just for string voicing and any kind of brass strings, brass, woodwind, keep the voicing minimal. Soft, mellow French horns, which I'll show you in a minute. And the fourth part of the thing is the heavy brass, the trombones and the French horns with stacks of reverb. Okay, now again, I'm not saying you have to do exactly this. I'm simply trying to put you in the mindset for the kind of music I think Brian will want from this. So let's go to the harmonic tropes now. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to record on the Mac. I'm just going to record onto Logic some strings. And what I've done here, I don't know how many people read music and how many people don't. So for each stave I've got, underneath I've got that on the next slide. I've got one that basically shows you the fingering positions for a keyboard. Middle C is in green, so you know where to put the rest of the notes. Anybody that can read, these are the chords, and they're the chords underneath it. So let's just play this one. And again. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to whack it back, and I'm going to try and put some French, put a typical, what I called before, a soft mellow French horn. Okay, now the chords are key here. You've got a C minor, you've got an A flat over a C, C minor 6, and an A flat over a C. And again, if you don't read music, these are the notes there. And it's that creeping up of the, it's that top note rising and lowering that makes it distinctively James Bond. Right, let me just try and put some French horn on here. So all I chords, and I was playing a line that was dancing around the chords. That's all. I mean, it's quite simple. This is not really a melody. It's just a French horn presence, really. Now, what I'm going to do the third time through, okay, I'm going to take these back, and I'm going to attempt to put some crisp James Bond trombones and tubas. Okay, this is all obviously I'm just doing this on the spot. So let's just try that again. So what you had there was trombones and tuba with absolute fistfuls of reverb. Reverb completely off the chart. Okay, and that is a classic version of what the James Bond music sounds like. Now, you don't have to copy those. You can basically stick to those kind of chord shapes and then try something new. You could try a piano. You could try a piano solo over that. Probably still work. They are your maps of the keyboard. That's middle C for anybody who prefers that way. Now, one thing that Hans Zimmer did when he did No Time to Die was he took the let's just try that. He took the James Bond chords, which are the second one, as you remember. If we go back to the previous one, A flat over a C, C minor 6, A flat over a C. Now, one thing that Hans Zimmer did was he basically made them all root positions. So what he did was this. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And this time I'm going to go, you see there's a first time bar and a second time bar. I'm going to go with that one, that one, that one, that one. I'm going to go back, that one, that one, that one, and I'm going to stop on that one. Okay. Okay, let's just try this. And repeat. And now I'm going to stop on the. Now this time, what I'm going to do is I want to experiment with putting a little piano over the top of that. Okay. Okay, let me just try this. Again, that's another combination. Strings, no French horn on that one, just strings and a nice piano. And you find those kind of things over almost all of the love scenes in the James Bond, which are a bit dated. They are a bit, let's be truthful, they are a bit misogynistic. And we're having a conversation before we went on air about how James Bond is going to go forward in the next 20 years and trying to kind of modernize its thing. Anyway. This is for later when because you'll get this PowerPoint. Brian will send this PowerPoint to you, so you'll be able to look at this in your own time. Obviously, we've only got an hour, and I'm nearly coming to the end of mine now. You got the keyboard things there.
Yeah. Sorry. Can I just briefly interrupt on that point, just so people are clear? So what I'll probably do with the PowerPoint is put it onto the product page as a free download. So keep your eye on that page. I'll put a button to download Brian's PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Now we're going to come to the second trope. The first one was the. Now you wouldn't put that everywhere. You'll just maybe mention that once or twice, maybe. This is the second harmonic trope, which basically goes in this particular key from a D to a G minor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a piece now that just goes from D to G minor to D. Okay, let's just get the strings down first. That little key change there to C minor. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stick the French horn over this, something a lot more melodic and a lot more romantic than the last few cues I played you, which are more kind of like a lot more kind of furtive. Okay. Time a little bit there because I couldn't quite hear the click. What I'm doing there is I'm just playing D to G minor, and again if we look at the thing there, it's just the same chords written out over the key map instead. D to G minor, or if you're in the key of C, C to F minor, that little chord trick with some kind of soft French horn thing there. Okay, now let's final one, the final trope before I pass over to Stefan, is just to look at the thing here. We've got an E minor chord, okay, just scored there. I'm going to put the strings back on. That's the first chord you'll see there. Now as a James Bond chord, that's pretty useless because it's too high up. Everything's in the middle. So the first thing is you go to bar 2. Okay, and the first thing you notice is that everything's lower down. And I've put in red there at the bottom 5 staves, you've got it scored out for an actual string section. That's a string reduction, and these are the actual strings: 2 first violins, a third violin, sorry, I beg your pardon, 2 first violins, a second violin, 2 violas, a cellos and basses. And you look at the space there between these notes, again a lot of vertical space at the bottom. Now just to look at those chords, I'm going to play you that chord there, which is a low E minor. Bar 3 has the 9th added. Now I'm going to add this component that's really bombed. And it's that real quintessential James Bond chord. For anybody that's nerdy enough to want to know what that actually consists of, it's actually an E minor chord at the bottom and a B chord at the top. So you play a B chord at the top, and then you add an E minor. And that works, frankly, on French horns as well. So and if I put the trombones on, that's the kind of stuff. And of course, if I had a keyboard that was long enough and I had all my samples here, I'd have the trumpets at the top as well, doing some kind of da-da-da-da, that kind of John Barry-esque thing going on. So I've put the keyboard thing there again. I'm not going to go through this one live. I'm going to put this one on the PowerPoint for you guys to have later. It's just a transition from different chords that lay outside each other's key center. Okay, so if you just quickly, if you pad, and then to G minor, and then to B flat minor. And you're creeping up these unrelated key centers, and again you'll find that in lots of James Bond films. Right at the end here, on these little chords here, lots of that kind of scoring where you have strings in tight formation at the top, first violins and second violins. Okay, I'll do one more little thing that I play, and then say a few more things, and then I'm going to hand over. So let's just play this one. This is going to go from G minor to B minor. We'll do the first two bars looped for now. Okay, so G minor to B minor. Let's just run that. Okay, let me delete the last one. Okay. And again. And the bar 3, G minor. What I'm going to do is put on a unashamedly very typical James Bond horn line. Okay, let's go for this one. Modulate back to down to the E flat minor thing at the end. Finally, just before I hand to Stefan the half-hour mark, some bits of general. I mean, obviously we could go on for hours about this. James Bond orchestration could take a lifetime to master, really. But just some bits of advice: don't overwrite horizontally. When I say horizontally, I mean from left to right. If you're writing a melody or you're writing some counterpoint, don't overfill it. Don't get too busy. Apart from those real shock chords you've got on the trombones, like stuff like that apart, don't overwrite horizontally, even in the fast bits. Even if you've taken this idea and you've put a load of fast rhythm behind it, don't overwrite it. Don't overwrite vertically. Don't overstimulate chords. Don't put too many notes in chords. Music has to breathe. Okay, when you play a chord, you have to be able to hear the notes in it, and if you've got fistfuls of notes, you simply don't hear any of them. You just hear a racket. Don't overfill the chords. Always be very aware of the subtlety of the genre. That's key with James Bond, absolutely key. And it's things that when they try these different composers out, they don't always get it right. Hans Zimmer did a brilliant job. David Allen did a brilliant job with Nicholas Dodd. Some others didn't always nail that kind of Bond thing. Be aware of the dialogue. We tell you this every week. Beware of the dialogue. Okay. Be aware of the film. In green, in other words, you can do this. Be spacious. If it's busy, don't crowd the film. Be spacious in your voicing. Don't crowd the orchestration. Always beware of the subtlety of the genre. Expansive strings, soft horns, biting lower trombones. Be aware of the dialogue. If you write over dialogue, don't be busy and watch the dynamics. Be aware of the film, and this little bit I think is key. The integrity of the film is paramount, always, with absolutely no exceptions. Okay, if you've written it, at the end of the day, your music has to work with the film. No matter how fancy or clever it is, musically, it has to work with the film. Right, I'm going to pass you over now to Stefan, so I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Brian.
Everyone is loving this. Thank you, Brian. That was fantastic.
No problem.
I've been chatting away with the viewers as you've been presenting, and there aren't any questions at this stage as such. There is one question which I think we're going to answer when we do Stefan's part, so I'm not going to preempt that. But They really like. They kind of. I kind of shared with them this idea of us doing a genre, at a time, in a sequence of these kind of work, and they love that idea. So that's something we can discuss a little bit after this. They're also talking about whether there's a way of, as well as your PowerPoint, which is fantastic, of course, and they're really grateful about that, is whether you or we, the QTube, or maybe together, we can distill some of this into a bit of a cheat sheet. So that's something we can have a meeting. That's something we can have a meeting about afterwards.
Okay.
I mean, the one, the thing is about this format is it is great, but the one thing that we lack is that communication with the audience.
Yeah.
If this was in a room with everyone together, I'd be stopping and going, right, what do you reckon to that, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's a bit weird doing it just with one way of traffic. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is the 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. So I don't want to steal any of Stefan's valuable time. But hopefully we'll come back to one of these questions during the course of it. So over to you, Stefan. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. I was going to ask you at the end of your bit there, Brian, when you were talking about the. Can you hear me?
Stefan,
okay.
I'm not hearing you.
Yep.
Yeah. You're not hearing me, Brian?
Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was. You were saying at the end of that bit, it was really interesting because the bit I wanted to touch on is about editing with James Bond, particularly with like fight scenes or action scenes. Sometimes the action scenes are different, but yet they have the same sort of piece of music over there. So with Bond, is it that you can get away with different approach to film music than maybe other types of film?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think of all the film genres out there, it's the one that's absolutely indelible.
Yeah.
And you stick that little chord sequence in, and you can solve a multitude of problems.
Yeah. That's because that's what sort of came to me when you were saying this, and I thought this is kind of interesting because what I'm going to sort of look at, and obviously we'll see what time allows, but about editing. So when you have music, obviously it smooths out the editing, but with quite a lot of James Bond, is the editing so obvious and it's so harsh that actually you could put pieces of music over over the different sections, and we talk about every week from the feedback sessions about sort of weaving it in and out. Maybe with James Bond it doesn't need to be. I'm not lessening it at all.
No,
I
know what you mean. Yeah.
That you can perhaps take a slightly different approach than the ones that we've been talking about in other sessions.
Good point.
Yeah, because that's what I noticed about that last slide you put about making sure that you follow the film, but in this case is following the James Bond film and following the James Bond formula, if you like. Okay, so what I'll do if I start my
Can I just share a question that's come up in the chat? It might be convenient to do that before Stefan launches.
Launches
on.
Yeah.
Goes into orbit. It's a really good question, and I suspect I know the answer, but I bow to your superior position, which is, how do you draw that line really between using and recognising familiar tropes and being faithful to the style and that type of thing, but then going too far and you're just being plagiaristic? How would you define that?
I think what you do is but basically if you're staying loyal to the tropes, then for example you could use that chord sequence and then you could play a line over it that is quite un-Bond. You could put a piano over there or an acoustic guitar or something which hasn't got that combination of French horn and strings. Or you could maybe have just a French horn on its own without the strings. So there's loads of ways you can stop yourself from literally just copying.
So this sort of throws up another conversation. I might go off track here, but is it the instrumentation then, or is it the chords, or is it? Oh, it's obviously both. But can you? which one could you get away with? Do you know what I mean?
I think if you use low strings, really low down in those little tight voicings, you're in that Bond world before you've even started to play the Bond chords. So you could, you could play a normal.
Yeah, even when you played like the bass note and the cello, it sounded
Yeah.
like Bond already.
If I
Yeah.
played just a regular, like, not Bond at all, but it's just got that low string, and it's in that, and also, of course, you're in that context of the film that Brian's made. And of course, even if your music was straying away from Bond, the film isn't.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway,
No,
sorry.
absolutely. Okay. Is there any other questions you wanted to put to us, Brian?
There is one, but I'm gonna hang fire because I think we're gonna cover it. So if we don't, I'll bring it up.
Can you all see my screen now? Yeah. Okay, cool. Right. So, I'll talk for a bit, and obviously, if there's questions come up, Brian, stop me. That's all fine. So, I mean, quite a bit of this I'll pick up from what Brian said, and I've got his PowerPoint in front of me, so I can also see it about, which I thought was great when he sent it me, because it says the first thing he said was on the PowerPoint was the real James Bond was always the music, which is and absolutely that's what we're talking about. But there's a few things I wanted to also put in. Firstly, it's escapist cinema, so it's kind of like that sort of big, bold, take you out of kind of reality. My memory of watching Bond, I was really young. It was films that were on at Christmas when I was a kid. I mean, we were sort of watching it, and my dad would go, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That never really happened." So what we're talking about is absolutely escapist cinema. So that's where I guess the sort of music plays a part in that. And Brian said that in his session, talking about the big sound. So to go along with the big sound is the big look as well. And I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about, which we've already been alluded to in the last couple of questions, is that it's a brand. So when you're presented with something like this, which is a competition, it's like, what? How far do we go down the road of recreating the brand, because it's obviously a very established brand. So I want to sort of maybe just go back a little bit to the beginning and think how has that sort of brand come about, and also how its origins have stuck with us, and that we are sort of still there. So to fit with what Brian was saying earlier about the idea of the Bond is about the music, absolutely. But what else do you think of when you think of a James Bond movie? And Brian was talking about not only the music but also the personality behind the music, which was John Barry. And I'm going to get onto a different personality. But what do you think of when you think of a James Bond movie? There are so many different layers. Some people will say Sean Connery, some people will say Roger Moore, some Daniel Craig. There are so many. Some people would say an Aston Martin, of course. There is such sort of broad scope of what actually makes a James Bond movie. So one of the things I wanted to get onto is what one of the things people don't think of is actually the director in this case, which is and the early ones, Lewis Gilbert, and possibly never heard of Lewis Gilbert. Cubby Broccoli, to the producer, his name is probably more recognizable than the director. But the other person that I wanted to really sort of focus on with this, so when Brian said earlier about the real James Bond was always John Barry, on my side, the real James Bond was always Ken Adam, actually, and that's the design, the set designer. Because when you think of a James Bond movie, and particularly the ones in the 60s, is the idea of the big set. So Ken Adam plays a really significant role in creating what I think is that James Bond world. So going back to what Brian was saying earlier about the music, so it is the same point really, is about how does the kind of big music fit um, with the big look, and looking at the clip that for the competition, um, Brian's got all the as the director has got all the elements in there. So looking at the design and the elegance of it, I think this is one of the sort of big things for me about a James Bond movie, is that kind of elegance and the look of it. So just to give you a bit of a background on Ken Adam, so he was a production designer of, I think he's so right from Doctor No through to Moonraker, I think 1979. Um, but he did Doctor Strangelove in 1964, the Kubrick film, and then obviously this, I think there's 64 is the same year as Goldfinger. So, and when you look at his sets, and these are kind of his drawings, they are, this is the drawing from Doctor Strangelove that he did as part of the design. They're pretty much James Bond sets, um, and so what you've got is this absolute kind of elegance that comes with that design. Now, also, if you think about the history and that period of the early 60s, you've got all this kind of the Cold War element to it, which is still very much a part of what's going on, and so you've got that kind of that fear of communism, all that stuff that's going on, which sort of fed into the character and the kind of world that was created. And Ken Adam was very much a big sort of part of that. So one of the, where is it that I wanted to look at? So yeah, so I found this book, and again, I'll pass this PowerPoint on to Brian. There's a book which I came across, which is great because it sort of takes a cultural look at the sort of James Bond franchise, and it makes a connection between what we have of kind of mainstream cinema and also sort of European cinema, which was happening around this time. So what you have is something that very much sort of stands on its own, because as it says here, it was in the modernist production design designed by Ken Adam for their elaborately engineered set pieces that Bond films issued the primacy of location shooting and levels of realism that became the hallmark of multiple new wave and art cinema movements. So it really does stand on its own. Now there's I think one of the things that's really unique about Bond, and I'll go back to a couple of those other slides in a minute, is that it does stand on its own, because if you think about the early 60s, the studio system in the early 60s had kind of collapsed. So it was a joint venture between a London-based company, Eon Productions. So it was a UK-US co-production. But actually, mainstream cinema and the studio system was sort of on its knees, but at this point, so it's almost like an independent, which was quite rare. And what was very sort of clever about it was the fact that it sort of tapped into that sort of mainstream cinema market, but it also brought into what was happening in Europe. So it had this kind of, it sort of appealed to the youth at the time in the early 60s. So where I'm going with this is where I picked up from what Brian said earlier about its sort of jazz influence. So if talking about the early 60s, so when Dr. No came out was 62, so Beatlemania at that point hadn't really taken off. Obviously the Beatles released their first single in 62, but what we had is sort of modernist thing. So the modernist architecture, the design, but also this modernist, which became a youth movement, what we then became to know as mods. And the early kind of mod movement, they were listening to jazz records. So that jazz influence was absolutely sort of fed into what we now know as that kind of James Bond. And if you think about the kind of elegance of the character, the way he's dressed, and all that kind of stuff, really did sort of feed into this. Now, the other bit of the European cinema new wave, French new wave, that I wanted to pick up on, which was here as the hallmark of multiple new wave and art cinema movements, was what they call exposing the mechanism. So the editing, and that is one of the big things that they picked up from now, because Breathless as the movie was so influential in general, particularly to the likes of Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, but it also had an influence on what happened with the Bond movies. So that book that I mentioned draws comparisons to this about the editing style, and it's what they call exposing the mechanism. So the editing becomes really, really obvious. So you can kind of spot the editing, jump cuts, and you're aware of it. So you're aware of the editing. So this is also where I'm going, is that once you're aware of the editing, you're aware of the techniques, and you can be aware of the music. So what I thought I would do, if we've got time, is maybe show a clip. Is that okay?
Yeah, great. I mean,
any questions come through, or
as long as it doesn't get us struck off YouTube, I think that's fine. No questions other than this one that's lingering, which I'm holding on to.
Okay.
But yeah, carry on.
So what I thought I would do is, if I show a very quick clip of Breathless editing, some of the jump cuts in Breathless, and then I will show a couple of, well, just maybe one clip of how they've used the similar editing technique in James Bond. Is that okay?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, right. Let me share my screen again. Hopefully you'll be able to see and hear this. So quite a few people may be aware of Breathless as the film. As I say, it was very, very influential, directed by Jean-Luc Godard, and you can see, if I just get rid of for a second, right, and you'll see the jump cuts. You'll just really notice them, right? Let me just play that.
Tu ne l'as plus?
Elle est au garage. Allez, quoi, je reste avec toi.
De toute façon, j'ai mal à la tête.
On ne sera pas ensemble, mais je voudrais rester à côté de toi.
Non, ce n'est pas ça, Michel. Pourquoi vous êtes triste?
Parce que je suis triste.
C'est idiot. Pourquoi tu es triste? C'est mieux quand je dis vous ou tu.
Pareil, je peux pas me passer de toi.
Tu peux très bien.
Oui, mais je veux pas. Regarde une Talbot, elle est belle, 2,5 litres.
Tu es un garçon.
Quoi?
Je ne sais pas.
Patricia, regarde-moi. C'est interdit d'aller voir ce type.
So you can see the cuts are just really, really awkward, and you kind of notice them straight away. So if I get rid of that one, let's have a look at the fight scene then from Thunderball. Actually, if I go slightly forward here, let's have a look.
Make smoke. Making smoke. Now. Stand by for conversion. Standing by.
So I'm just going to go a bit more forward, actually, to this point. The first thing I sort of noticed, I mean, the cuts are really obvious, but it's like there was no music in the early bit, and then it comes in, and then it sort of drops out, and then that same cue.
I've got one bomb aboard. He's gone mad. Please talk to them.
So if I just go a little bit further, so it sort of drops out, and then it comes to this bit here. Comes back in. Right, at this point, this is where the jump cuts start. This is where they borrowed the exact same sort of fast cuts and jump cuts that they took from Breathless. And so it goes on. Right. So my come out of here. My point there is that it's really obvious. I mean, that's where they're borrowing that style of cutting from French New Wave, and the editing's really obvious, and the music's kind of placed on top of it. So it's not necessarily sort of crafted into it. So you become really aware of it, but it's not off-putting. Well, I don't think it is. You actually brought in quite a bit closer to it. So one of the things I was going to ask you, which we talked earlier about, Brian, was that when you constructed this clip as the director, how much of it did you look at old Bond or any Bond clips in terms of editing?
What do you mean constructed? You mean shot, obviously.
Sorry, shot. Yeah.
How dare you? How dare you?
You're quite right to correct me.
So it's a great question. This actually, this will allow me to address the question actually that's lingering in the air. So, I mean, I've loved Bond like forever, and I think actually Bond or the first Star Wars, no, The Empire Strikes Back, one of those, either Diamonds Are Forever or The Empire Strikes Back was the first film I ever saw in the cinema. I'm not sure which was which came first, and I've absolutely loved Bond ever since. Although my enthusiasm did dip a bit during the Pierce Brosnan era, I must admit.
Oh, no.
I know, Brian. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, no accounting for taste. So it's sort of in my blood, and I kind of felt. I think, I hope it's come across. Obviously, people may say, Brian, you've got no feel for this whatsoever. But I think that there's a bit of a feel for it that informed what we put together. And obviously, the idea that I had in mind really was that. It's going to be a rare thing for a composer to have an opportunity to compose for something like a James Bond film. And I thought, we've never really done anything like that in our library or with our community. So let's try and put something together and sort of like no holds barred, go for it. You've got an orchestra at your disposal. Let's see what you make of it, and I really hope that people will sort of embrace that opportunity. And sort of to kind of go into the question that's in the chat, and then I'll come back a little bit to your question, Stefan. There's a question about like, to what extent are we looking for people to kind of demonstrate a grasp of the tropes, and to what extent are we, hoping they'll not do that? And I think that the answer is, really, this is a James Bond film, essentially. And so we would look, Brian, feel free to sort of bolster my answer with something more substantial than my waffle. But I think we would be looking to feel, and recognise that this is of that ilk. But we're also looking for composers to, genuinely bring some creativity, original ideas, and perhaps take it, in a slightly new direction, which I think is what you see during the history of the franchise. You see the foundation laid there in the 60s, in all of it, in the production and in the music and everything, and the character himself. And then as you go forward to the more recent films, there's an evolution there. And so, we're obviously not opposed to originality, but
I think you should be respectful of the tropes. But also be mindful of the need to slightly grow it and evolve it. And like I said in my session, every composer that's taken this on has brought something new to it. I mean, when Zimmer obviously came on board, he brought all the inevitable Zimmerisms, and there was a lot of really fresh percussion and a lot of really driving rhythms and a lot of contemporary feel, but you still had that basic reverb, brass and strings.
Sure.
I think so long as you don't get rid of everything, I think so long as you keep something which ties it to Bond, I think you've got a considerable scope there for doing your own thing. But just remember, like Brian said, it is a Bond film.
I mean, I think it would be, if you look at the two extremes, if you like, I think it would be a real shame if all you do is use the chords that Brian's shown us in the masterclass.
Oh, yeah.
But equally, I think it would be a real shame if you just ignore, what this is and just come up with some kind of, drum and bass, synth-based, completely radical soundtrack for it. Enjoy yourselves by all means, but I mean, that's equally not really what we kind of had in mind.
All I was trying to do with those chords is really to get people into a James Bond state of mind. I'm not thinking for 1 minute that they should replicate that.
Sure. No, it's tremendous.
If you're in that state of mind, then you might look at those chords and go, right, okay, let's try this instead. Mm-hmm. But let's try it flooded with reverb, and let's try it with the stabby trombones and stuff. Yeah. It's just to try and get people on that wavelength, that's all.
Yeah, brilliant. And to go back to Stefan's question, so when we were shooting it, there were certain ingredients, certain tropes that I wanted to include. We wanted a little bit of jeopardy, of course, so that there's a tension and so on to be communicated by the music as much as what's happening on film. I also wanted the title sequence, because I think that's always been such an iconic part of every James Bond film. And I really thought it would be brilliant for the composers to have the opportunity to not be thinking about underscoring and about sort of hitting beats, but actually just expressing themselves, in that sort of Bond style. But then equally, they've got the action sequence at the start to kind of do the underscoring type of thing as well. So it's a bit of both. It's got the travel, it's got a lot of tropes. It's got the international thing, it's got this sort of mean and moody lead character, and it's got the very British stiff upper lip kind of chief orchestrating things. You know, so yeah, tried to give it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is where I was sort of my final slide, which I had up just before, is about take all this inspiration, which is exactly what, when you look at your clip, is what you've done. You've taken inspiration from all the elements, but for the composers to do the same thing and to follow what Brian's picked, you know, all the chords and all the tricks that he's sort of presented to everyone, to take those, but to then not necessarily just recreate them, but to create them in their own identity, really. And I think that was the thing, because to me it's like if that's what these guys did originally. So Ken Adam was very influenced by the modernist architecture, and he wanted to sort of fit in with that period, but he's created his own kind of version of it, which is now sort of stuck, if you like. And then the producers have worked with the editors to sort of say, well, what's happening in film at the moment? So they've looked at that kind of European style of editing, where it's really obvious editing, and they've used that, but they've done it in their own way. So taking inspiration but creating your own identity at the same time, absolutely, to me is the key to probably the best way to making this work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just dealing with some questions in the chat, which I don't need to share particularly. So yeah, that's it. You know, clearly I didn't want it to be. I didn't want it to be a complete knockoff, in the same way that we don't want the music to be a complete knockoff. But yeah, have a kind of real classic, international, glamorous, dramatic, dangerous vibe as well, you know. So yeah. And see how far we could go with this, with clearly not shooting it. I'm going to admit that we didn't actually shoot it, and just see how far we could go, whether we could make something credible that would excite the composers, excite the community, and then see what they would bring to it, you know, to take it even further, and just see what kind of incredible result we could get from it. I'm really excited to see what people do, and to hear the orchestra do it. I mean, I'm just going to be sitting there absolutely buzzing. I mean, I cannot imagine how this is going to be. So one of the questions that keeps coming up, which I am going to address, it's not necessarily relevant for Brian and Stefan to discuss, but feel free to contribute, which is, to what extent should they be sticking to the orchestra configuration that we've described in the instructions? So the basic points, the main points on that are as follows. The orchestra is there for you. It's an instrument for you to include in your arsenal. Obviously, the prize will be for the orchestra to record for you. But if you want to add guitars, if you want to add drums, if you want to add even a voice, feel free to do so for your submission. The only thing to be aware of is that we won't be able to record that. In all likelihood, we won't be able to record that when we do the session with the orchestra. So you would then have to, you know, take care of that yourself afterwards. So you would have the session from the orchestra delivered to you, and you could then mix it in with whatever you like to post onto your YouTube channel, including your portfolio and all that type of thing. We have done that type of thing before with score relief winners, where they've had the orchestra session and then they've taken that mix from NFO and they've enhanced it, if you like, with some additional voices and instruments. So that is the basic answer to that question. Brian, any thoughts on that? I mean, so when we get submissions...
I think obviously you've got to be wary of the orchestration. You know, the orchestra that I know you've told them what's it, you know, how many players are in the orchestra and what the divisions are and stuff. Just be very mindful of that. And it's one thing writing a score which has got another element which you will mix onto it later yourself, but it's another thing writing a score which doesn't lend itself to being played with the orchestra. So just bear that in mind, that you know, this will be played by an orchestra. So, and obviously the Bond kind of aesthetic is an orchestra. It's kind of a jazz idiom fused with a symphony orchestra, really. So just bear that in mind. So yeah.
I hope that's answered the question, because it keeps coming up, and I've tried to answer it, but people keep asking the same question. All right, Stefan, was there anything else? Had you quite finished yours, or was there a little concluding?
Yeah,
bit?
no, I think I've finished mine. I think my sort of final points really were just to sort of look at the stylization really of it, because I think paying attention to, obviously my thing that we talk about for me every week is how it fits with the picture. So that what Bond says, and I said at the very beginning, is that what does it say to you? What do you most recognise? And I think that there's a certain look about it, and that look probably then needs to be interpreted in the music as well. So I mean, the word elegance always comes up to me for this, and I think that's what really fits with the Bond look and the Bond feel, going back to those early films, and that's where it all sort of stems from. And that to me is where I was saying about the origins of it, of having that kind of jazz element. And Brian pointed that out in his session, that I think that kind of jazz influence is embedded, because I think that's not to sort of say that everyone should do a jazz score, but I think that the look of it, the look of the clip, and also the rhythm of it, and the rhythm of the editing, because the editing can be quite frantic in a Bond clip, and quite often music has to fit around that. That's as why I was asking Brian earlier, whereas maybe with Bond you can get away with it a little bit more, because the editing isn't that rhythmic. It is quite frantic. It is quite exposed. You are aware of it, and quite often that's where the French New Wave guys were breaking with the tradition, because originally in Hollywood editing had to be invisible. They got rid of that.
Right.
So editing is editing.
Right.
They were making a point that these films are not real, obviously, but in this case it stuck, and so the Bond clips or any Bond film has this quite harsh editing, so it's getting music to fit with that.
I mean, it might be quite interesting as well for you even to understand a little bit about the process of editing it, because what I did was in a way, I mean, it's a little bit of an iterative process, but quite fundamental to the process was me finding some music early on, which is actually the temp track that we've supplied as part of the package, and creating that, kind of cutting that almost. Again, it's a bit back and forth between the visuals and the music, but I did actually sort of almost start with music that conjured up a specific that Bond feel, and kind of then get pictures, and then change the music a little bit, and then change the pictures a little bit, and slowly work towards something that all works together. And the pacing of it, the editing, the cuts, and everything. The music informed it to some extent. Yeah.
Did you cut it to the music then?
A little bit of both. A little bit. The music really guided me, but the music itself is also a bit of a cut. I've also cut the music up a little bit as well, so it's a kind of back and forth, a little bit interplay between the music and the visuals.
It's interesting this, because this is what I just really notice about the editing in Bond. It's really upfront, and so is the music, of course. So in other words, I think the audience has got to do quite a lot of work. Really digesting that, because it's all there. It's very upfront, and Brian said it in his opening session. It's a big sound. Well, it's also a big look as well. So it's like being able to make that work.
I'm just answering a question, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think people are quite interested in what I've just said. I mean, I'm not going to flesh that out too much. I mean, maybe one day I'll do a video showing that process. I have recorded the process actually, but it's a massive amount of video that I need to cut down to something that's digestible, because I thought at some point it might be actually interesting for people to see how I put it together. But yeah, it's exciting.
With your version, as soon as I saw it, I was like, the Casino Royale credit sequence was it sort of sprang to mind actually when I saw your version. So I'm sure people, are going to go away and look at that and see what sort of I did. But that's again, you look at those later films and they still hark back to to the originals.
Yeah, very much so.
So that modernist influence that the likes of Ken Adam stamped on the films, they're still there.
Yeah,
that's the thing to take away from this. Is that those little touches, or big touches in this case, but are still very much part of it. And it's whether how far down that road composers are going to go into that when they're constructing music. I'll be same. I'm going to be fascinated to see what people come up with for this.
Yeah, I mean we've obviously started to get submissions already, which is great. So well done to everyone that's got their submissions in.
Already.
Yeah, we've had a few already. I would just remind everyone. I mean, it's on the screen, but the deadline is the 10th of February at 10 o'clock in the morning, UK time, GMT. Everything is on the website. It's really interesting to see what people come up with, for sure. And I think there's going to be a great variety. And I mean, people shouldn't be afraid, having said everything that we've said, people shouldn't be afraid of just doing their own thing and having the courage of their convictions as well. I don't want to discourage that by any means. I think that would be wrong for us, really, as a creative community, to try and say, it must be this, it must be that. I mean, if you really passionately believe in something, go for it, and we'll give everybody a fair crack, for sure. But if you wanted guidance, it's all here in this video. So
Absolutely.
Awesome. Do you know, by the way, guys, whether any of your students are has anyone voiced? Have you shared it with them? Or have they voiced interest in participating?
We haven't started teaching again until next week.
Okay.
A week tomorrow. Yeah.
A week tomorrow.
So we haven't seen them. Yeah.
Oh gosh, so it's going to be kind of late for them, isn't it, by then? Yeah.
But we will get it obviously sent to them anyway. So
Yeah. Well, hopefully there are some that are in the community that know about it, and perhaps they've shared it with the peer group. But yeah, thanks everyone. It's been superb as always. I think watch this space for updates on the next live review stream with Brian and Stefan, which will be finishing the last one that we did, which was the trailers, wasn't it? The 2 trailers.
That's it. Yeah.
And so on. So watch this space. We'll announce dates and everything for those. And we'll also be setting up some more bits and bobs around this competition with Nicholas Dodd and so on. We've got various ideas, that we've been talking about. So no spoilers at this stage. But good luck, everyone that's busy composing for this. You've got about 3 weeks, I think, or maybe 2 weeks left. 2.5 weeks, something like that. So good luck. Enjoy yourselves. That's the main thing. And Brian and Stefan, thank you.
Nice to see you.